was dancing, I was singing, but my story is locked in my soul. You can laugh to your tunes, cry for the moon, my silence sings loudest of all. My silence sings loudest of all. Not for the king, nor the sorrow in his eyes, nor for your country sovereign, no, not even for the crown that Parliament despise, just for my raven queen, oh, only for my raven queen.
Welcome to another very special episode of Dead Men Talk, and this one really delves back into almost my roots, really, what kind of got me into writing, because everybody knows who's listened to this my love for certain styles of music and songwriting, and I'm so happy to bring on to the show someone who is responsible for some of the earliest folk music that I listened to and kind of really sort of got the gears in motion for me in terms of my writing. I know him through his music, but by no means that's not everything he's done. But welcome to the show, Tom Bliss. Thank you for coming on.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Yes,
Good.
I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. Being very self-indulgent in Alderney in the Channel Islands at the moment, which is this island here behind me.
Very nice. Very nice. Is that where you're based now? Is it over there? Or?
Well, increasingly so, yes. We can work from here. We couldn't get over at all last year because of the pandemic. We've spent a lot longer here. We can't move here full time for all kinds of reasons, although it's really home. We've still got commitments in Leeds that we can't abandon, but we're experimenting with longer visits. And we'll probably be spending an increasing amount of time here, or at least a substantial amount of time here, because it's just too lovely.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, somewhere completely different, isn't it? Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll kickstart off. The best thing to do really is if we kind of, I'll let you do a little bit of an intro for anyone who's not familiar with you and what you've done. Again, I've introduced the fact that you're a musician, songwriter. Just kind of give us a bit of a background of what you've done in the past in a nutshell to kick us off.
Okay, well, they say careers are bell-shaped. So my career started off school. I was always a songwriter. I started writing songs in the early days of folk music and even played some folk clubs back then. But then I went off to Leeds Polytechnic to study as a landscape architect, and did that for a little while after I qualified, but was then seduced by punk and new wave and went off to try and do that for a living. And infamously got signed up by Pete Waterman before either of us were famous. Only it never came to anything. There's a very long story about why that didn't work. Okay. Probably I wasn't good enough after all. Rick Astley got my gig.
No.
I think he was very good. And then I decided to leave landscape architecture and retrain in television. So I spent most of my life working as a scriptwriter, producer, director in TV, doing documentaries and a lot of corporate work, which involves working across a whole range of genres. You have to be able to pick anything up that the client wants, using all sorts of different styles, but using a visual narrative. But obviously, television is actually an audio narrative first and foremost. Film is a visual medium, but television is an audio medium with pictures pasted over the top. So you know it's a lot closer to radio, and I've done a bit of radio too. So I did that for most of my career. And then around about the time I met the famous Tom Napper, who I'm sure will crop up a lot in this podcast. Although Tom and I didn't know each other, but I was playing with a band called Slide and starting to write songs that really seemed to touch people in a way. I'd gone back to the folky style, which I had not really played with at all. And what with one thing and another, it just seemed like an opportunity to give it a go, finally, a second attempt at being a professional musician. So we started playing together and it clicked. He lived only a mile down the road. We were very compatible, and I was the writer. He didn't really write much, wrote a few tunes,
Okay.
and at least one very funny song. And he could write, but he didn't particularly want to, but he had a huge range of traditional material, and he was really expert. So he was my bellwether. He was the quality control, he called it.
Okay.
He'd say, that song will do, that song won't.
Cool.
And after a while, I realized actually some of the songs that Tom didn't really enjoy playing were going to be quite popular, and I needed to earn a bit more money. So I started doing solo gigs in between the tours with Tom, and produced a few solo albums, which Tom played on. So it all got a bit muddled up. And that went on until the end of 2010. So the 10 years, the first of the noughties, really, we were doing that up and down the country all the time, 200, 250 gigs a year. But not really abroad. And I think if we'd gone abroad, we might have been able to carry on, but we wanted to move it on up to another level, but the folk clubs were starting to get a bit old and tired. So we made a kind of joint decision. Also, Tom decided to get married to an old girlfriend and move to Scotland. And we tried to keep it going a bit after that. But in the end, I decided to give up the music. We both did, really, the touring anyway. And I went back to university and did a master's in my original qualification of landscape architecture, and was asked to join the staff almost immediately. And so I still do that. I teach landscape architecture and urban design at Leeds Beckett University, and that's all around climate change and sustainability, which I've been passionate about for a very long time. I've always been an environmentalist in inverted commas in various ways. And then for 4.5-5 years, I also worked at the other university in Leeds, with a team of like a research charity headed up by Piers Forster, who's on the Committee for Climate Change, is one of the senior climate scientists in the world, probably, marvellous chap. IPCC lead author and all that kind of thing. So I got very into the science of trees, carbon, and all that. Now, you're probably thinking, where is the common thread to all that? And there is a common thread. It is got two things: narrative and narrative in landscapes. And those are the two things which hold everything I do together. They're my passions: stories and places.
That was it. We had a chat when we first discussed doing this, and you said a lovely thing, that storytelling is your thing, and that's really what's fed through, which is really what holds all the relevance to this podcast, because this is really where I started it, is to do with storytelling and delving into the stories behind other stories of other people, and it's what really pulled me towards your music. So to fill everyone in, because me and Tom have chatted about this, we know where the link comes in and everything, so just to fill everyone in, it was back in sort of 2007. Tom Napper, who Tom plays with or played with, is a family member of my mother-in-law. So we went to see them live when they did a local gig, and it was quite early on with me discovering folk music for myself through the likes of Seth Lakeman and Show of Hands, particularly down here. And I think in that time, because I was getting so immersed in it, when we came to see you, your songs really did connect with me. And I had no idea why, really. And I think looking back on it, it is the fact that I'm drawn to anything that tells a story. So obviously starting with the music side and that, in general, what has fed your creativity in terms of songwriting? Is there particular things that really you are drawn to, so particular kind of stories, or does it come from
Well, I mean, you just mentioned Show of Hands, and I have to give them credit, really, for a very big nudge in the right direction. I'd started going back and playing folk music again, just going on to sessions, Irish sessions in Otley, near Leeds, where I live when I'm not here in Alderney. I fell in step with the chap who runs the Otley Folk Club and Folk Festival, Steve Fairholme, who introduced me to Show of Hands, literally. They used to stay at his place, and said, "You must come and see this band." And I immediately went, "Hang on, I get this," because it was the kind of narratives that I really enjoyed. So as a documentary maker, and also somebody who's written a certain amount of fiction, I'm really interested in true stories, because I think truth is stranger than fiction. And I studied it in some depth as a scriptwriter. Memorably, I was asked to go on the Robert McKee course on story. I don't know if you've come across Robert McKee.
I haven't.
Wrote a wonderful book called Story, and he does these amazing 3-day seminars, which everybody and anybody, a lot of, John Cleese, all kinds of great filmmakers have been on. All recognize him as being, the absolute guru. And I was going to write I was going to make a documentary about Sark, actually. And a couple of people, friends of mine here, were in television and had the right contacts. And they said, no, we'd like to make a feature film. And I went, ooh, okay. And they said, we'd like you to write it. And I went, that's a bit of a big ask, never tried to write a whole feature film. Yeah. And they said, well, to help you, you should go on Robert's course. So I did. I went and stayed with them in Putney and went on this thing. And it was, first of all, I came back the first day and said it was like being on a long haul flight. He won't let you speak. You just listen. He basically recites his book over 3 days. It's extraordinary what he comes up with, how story works, why it works. And he gives all these amazing examples, and it is absolutely seminal. I can't recommend it highly enough. He's still doing them. Okay. But then after the second day, I said, yeah, it's definitely like a long haul flight, but something else is happening and I can't work out what it is. And then the end of the third day, I came back and said, no, it's not about being on a long haul flight. It's like being present at the birth of your first child. Wait, it's not. It's like being at the presence of your first child on a long haul flight. That's what it was. It was just a life-changing experience. Cool. And so that had all happened beforehand. In fact, the film was never made. I never even finished writing it. Various other things got in the way, as is the state of things. Yeah. But I turned that story into a song, The Silver Load of Sark, which is the title track of the album behind you there, The Silver Load there. And that was the catalyst. I first performed that to a small group of friends at a party after a Show of Hands gig here in Alderney, accompanied or assisted by Steve Knightley. That was the first time I did it. And from that came, I went back to Leeds and I started putting together a band. And I realized that my songs you could compress a whole movie script into 4 verses. But you had to, every word would count. And it's that poetry, the ability to make sure that every little bit of the narrative is doing both the storytelling and the scene setting. So the context, the landscape, the poetry, if you like, in that is important. And very often, there has to be a payoff at the end. Either it's humorous or it's some kind of key. It would be called the obligatory scene in movies. You have the inciting incident at the beginning and the obligatory scene, and nearly all narratives have this. And so the obligatory scene is often just a single word in a folk song, which is why I decided to perform in folk clubs and folk settings, because they're quiet enough for people to really pay attention. Because if you miss that one word or that one phrase, the whole thing's gone.
Yeah. Was it a conscious decision to then write folk music, or is that something that just happened from?
Well, I'd always. That's a terminological inexactitude. You can't write folk music by definition, according to the sort of dictionary definition of folk music. And of course, it all got blurred, and we can blame various Americans and some English people as well for that. But if you're talking about traditional storytelling and songs based around that, then you can't create those. All you can do is adapt and learn from them and build on them. But I was a songwriter. I've always liked writing music. I wrote music for television. I wrote songs in all kinds of genres, and I like creating. So the trick was to use that show of hands approach, if you like, and write new songs in a traditional style that would sit quite happily alongside traditional material. And that was the challenge, really, and that's where Tom was so useful, because he would say whether I was moving too far away from that feel. I remember when I started off, when Tom and I were first, either before I met Tom or soon after I met him, I was chatting to, I think it was Pete Coe, a fantastic performer and writer and player and just a magnificent man all round. And he said, you can make a living in the folk clubs, but you have to work incredibly hard and you have to be able to play them all pretty much. And for a songwriter, that was a challenge because there's a lot of folk clubs that aren't interested in new material. They only want the traditional stuff.
Okay.
Now, a few of those relented because Tom was in the band and they wanted him. So they put up with me. Nearly all of them booked us back, which was great.
Yeah.
And some of them, quite a lot of them even booked me on my own later on. And even the ones who held out, were 2 or 3 who just were not interested because I was writing new material. And they, in the end, some of the big ones didn't because we weren't famous enough.
Yeah.
But all the small ones I'd been secretly poking away at for all those 10 years, they all booked us in the end. Cool. And we're quite happy with my interpretation. I think because, as you saw when you came to the gig, the song was not the only bit. Tom's a fantastic raconteur. I mean, really funny, really engaging, lots of really interesting stuff. And because he would do often quite lengthy introductions to just tunes, just tune sets, he'd have great, jokes and things. And that allowed me to do the same thing. So a Napa Bliss gig was as much storytelling as it was music. I mean, if you actually cut up the duration of the gig, there was almost as much talking as there was playing.
Yeah, and that's the first time. I think your gig was probably the first time I had really seen that. I'd seen Seth Lakeman possibly once before that live. It didn't do a lot of sort of explaining in between his songs. So if you really felt like you were part of the it's just part of the environment when you're at one of your gigs, because it's quite intimate and you really get a feel for it. It's what I like. I've got tickets to see Steve Knightley on his solo tour, which kept being put back. I know he does that, where he backs up all of his songs with the meanings behind them. It's a wonderful thing. Before we get into, there's a few particular songs that I've picked out that I absolutely love of yours that I want to kind of delve in behind at some point. But as a musician, multi-instrumentalist to say the least, yourself, I can just about play the guitar. I would absolutely love to break outside of that, but I think I'm past the point of no return with that now. Just give an overview of what it is that you know, the instruments you play, and at what stage of your life that you picked those up and decided to kind of run with them.
Okay, well, the first was, I think, the piano. I'm told that I was playing the piano like this above my head when I was 2.
Wow.
And picking out a tune with one finger and playing 2-note chords under it.
Wow. Okay.
I can remember doing that, but we have a family violin. It's 1/8 size. So that's half the size of a quarter size, if anybody's seen that. It's an absolutely tiny little thing. And it was sourced or given to the family by Clara Schumann, who was the tutor of one of my great aunts. Yes, great aunts, who went to study towards the end of her life, Clara's life, and it came back for little Faye, who was my mother's aunt or first cousin once removed, I think, and then it's passed down the family. And my niece and nephew both played it and went on to become really superb musicians. I mean, real sort of concert soloist standard.
Wow.
Neither are doing that now, but Catherine went on to play in a quartet, I think, that went on Top of the Pops and backed Elton John and Robbie Williams and people like that. So this little violin is very important. So I started on that when I was 3. Okay. And because nobody ever said I could hold it this way around, that way if you're looking at it. Even though I'm left-handed, I played the way that everybody does. And I think this probably had an impact on how I went on to play. So when I eventually picked up, I then played the piano as well through my early school career, but I always wanted a guitar. And in the end, I hit on a good ploy. I told my parents I would give up the violin unless I was allowed to have a guitar.
Okay.
But I naturally picked it up the same way round.
Sure.
And I think this whole, I don't know if you know about left-handed, right-handed music. It's an excellent book by a guy called Todd Taylor. He was in the band Advertising. Look it up if you can find it, which I could talk about for a couple of hours. And so I think that I like a certain type of musical approach. So I then went on, for a long time, I couldn't fathom the mandolin because I just picked up other people's. And of course the fingering's just the same as the violin, so I knew that. And the plectrum bit is just the same, the whole way you hold it's the same as guitar, but I couldn't do it. I thought, this is ridiculous. I tried loads of times and just always put it down again. And then one day I thought, right, I'm just going to buy one. I went to the shop, bought one, brought it home, and within an hour, I was playing it without any problems at all. It just needed that commitment. So then that led to the whole of the mandolin family, because they're all the same, basically. So I've got mandolin, mandola, octave mandolin, mandocello, and a manda bass is just an acoustic bass guitar, basically. It's just a different shaped body, but there's no difference. Just tuned in fourths, unlike the others, which are tuned in fifths, same as a violin. I mean, they match, the cellos and the mandolins match each other. Well, you know, it's actually the mandola and the viola are the parents. The mandola predates the viola. So mandolin and violin and so on down to double bass. And, explain all that too if you let him. He's a great mandolin player, an old friend of mine, you know, Captain Grelly's mandolin, all that sort of stuff. So I played the flute at school, and so I went on and I play the whistle mostly. I don't play the flute much. I've only got an Irish unkeyed one, which is devilishly difficult to play, and I don't play it enough to you know, have to work at it. My embouchure is gone. And then various other, anything really that's got a neck and frets. They're all the same, really. Just once you started using different guitar tunings and go on between the guitar and the mandolin, you just play whatever you need to do. You can take a little while to get into it, so that's easy enough. And then because I had a 5-string fiddle for a while, which I was playing when I first started working with Tom. So that's like both a viola and a violin in one instrument, 5 strings. But it was converted from a 4-string and very difficult. And I got a frozen shoulder. I couldn't reach to play it. So I sold it. And funny enough, I've just seen it on the internet. I sold it to somebody called Tanya Opland, who still plays it. She's based in Alaska, and by her husband, Mike Freeman. And just picture of has popped up on my feed only today or yesterday, playing this wonderful instrument. But I replaced it with something that didn't involve holding my hand up here, because it was 18 months I couldn't play at all. So I got a concertina, a duet concertina, which you can play really rich chords on. There's 3 totally different types of concertina. You can be a virtuoso on one, and you can't begin to play the other 2. They look the same.
Interesting.
And then even within the one I play, the duet, there are 3 completely different systems. So you can be a virtuoso on the one I play, the McCann system, and the other 2 systems, although they're all duet concertinas, completely impossible to play. And also piano accordion, because obviously I can play keyboards and so on. So that's about it, I think. The other things, harmonica, I play a bit of harmonica. And of course, now I've become a drummer.
Oh, wow.
That's another.
Just to add to it. Gee. Wow, that is very, very impressive.
A percussionist, I should say. I have a miniature kit, which I play with my current band, the Lost Larks.
Very cool. Very cool. It's great. It's great to know, actually, that you're still into it. I know when we just discussed it,
we'll come on to that at the end.
That's fine.
We do have a gig.
Brilliant. Okay, ideal. We'll definitely touch on that at the end. Awesome. So yeah, just a few of your songs that have always stuck with me. I'd quite happily put these 2 albums on at any point and let them run, but I do gravitate to certain ones. So I'm quite a fan of history. So sort of any folk songs out there that have some kind of historical narrative to it will always get my attention. Campbell the Rover, Raven Queen, Newry Highwayman, and Flotsam and Jetsam.
Okay, well, 2 of those are traditional. So Campbell the Rover is a traditional song, and it's one of those sort of slightly humorous. Now, whether it's traditional or whether it's actually a music hall song, with the Irish tradition, these things get a bit muddled up, because a lot of people wrote songs, you know, to perform in the vaudevilles. But the way that Tom sings that one, and the way that we do it is very much in that kind of quite aggressive story style. And the other, sorry, so Flotsam and Jetsam is mine. What were the other 2? The other 3 I've forgotten now.
Raven Queen.
Oh, Raven Queen, So Raven Queen is mine, so what was the other? The 4th one was, the other traditional one was
Newry High.
Newry High. Okay. Now that's another one. That's another traditional one. Again, it has a similar thing. Again, Irish. I can't remember where I heard it. But there was something about the way that it fell in. I think I started doing it because it seemed to fit with the way that Tom played his traditional songs. And it worked really well. We always finished the set with as an encore. Now, the other 2, Raven Queen, now that was an interesting challenge. A friend, a person, I can't remember even who it was, somebody told me the story about Henrietta Maria and how she had landed at Bridlington and under fire from Cromwell's troops and had hid under this bridge at Boynton, which is on the back road between Leeds and Bridlington that I often used to drive along with the family, because we used to go up to Bridlington and Filey and places like that. Yeah. And so the next time I was there, I went and had a look at this bridge and thought, right, there's this place where she'd stayed for three days and nights. Yeah. And by the time she got to York to meet up with Charles, he was already arrested and in chains. And obviously we all know what happened to him. Yeah. So I just, again, it was that challenge. Can I tell a story? Can I get this into a narrative? And Flotsam and Jetsam, that was a really difficult one. In some ways, that's the song I'm most proud of, technically, because it's really long. It's difficult to hold an audience's attention. It's a tricky guitar part as well. And I wanted, and that's one that has a long introduction, because there was about 3/4 of the story I couldn't fit even into a 6-7 verse song. Is it mad? Even 8 verses. It's a long time. And it has a solo in the middle to make it seem shorter. Because if you break it up and put some music in, the audience get a bit bored of your voice. Then you could go on for another 4 or 5 verses. Cool. So yeah, that's the story, obviously, of Sir Cloudesley Shovel being wrecked on the Scillies. But just, I mentioned earlier on about how The Silver Load is a movie condensed into a song. Now, the reverse happened with a historical narrative. After I finished playing with Tom and I finished my masters, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I'd been asked to do some teaching, but at that stage it was fairly early on and there wasn't an awful lot going on. So out of the blue, I got an email from a guy called Doug Ford in Jersey. And he was head of the Heritage Museum, Maritime Museum, all the museums actually. He was education officer. And he said, could you write a show, an opera? And I went, well, I've got a bit of time. What do you mean? He said, well, you know your song, The Merry Bells of Hellier. Okay. And I said, yes. He said, well, could you expand that into a whole 2-hour show? And I went, well, yes, I could, but I really, it takes so much time. I couldn't commit. I need to be getting a bit more work. And he said, oh, we'll pay you. Okay. I said, oh, well, yeah, but it's still going to be I don't know, it's going to take me months. It's going to take me 6 months or 4 months or something. He said, oh, yeah, we'll pay you. So they named a figure and I went, all right. So that was, so the story of the Merry Bells of Hellier was actually inspired by a painting by Francis Copley, which is the National Gallery. And it's called The Death of Major Pearson. Right. And it shows Major Pearson expiring in St Helier, at the Battle of St Helier, which is 1781, January the 4th. And it's the last land battle that took place between England and France, and the last battle on English soil, on British soil. It's not actually England. The Channel Islands are 4 independent nations, Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney and Sark, long, complicated, talk about that for a couple of hours. But he wanted that. So I created a whole narrative. He was an expert on the cod trade. This is Doug, had written a book about the Gaspé cure, which is the kind of drying of the cod that they did in Gaspé, which is near Newfoundland, on the peninsula between the St. Lawrence River and the sea. Because there were Jerseymen there. It's now pretty much established the very first people to find the United States, as it now is, were from Jersey, before St. Brendan. But they've been going across there for centuries, millennia possibly. And there was a big Jersey colony in Gaspé. So the narrative is this young lad from Jersey winds up going over there. And because he's a French speaker, when he's shipwrecked there, he's rescued by some Acadians who are anti-French, but and anti-British because of the way they've been. So they're little independent lot. Right. So he winds up making friends with this girl. But then when the French are recruiting in Gaspé and in Newfoundland for the raid on Jersey, which it happened, it's all historically accurate, then he winds up going back to Jersey in disguise as a Frenchman on a French boat. So he's then got to get ashore and warn his pals that they're landing before. So all of the songs from all the music is from the period. I didn't make up any tunes at all. I chose deliberately not to do that. This is all traditional material. Some songs are as they were at the time. Others I have rewritten, and there's a certain amount of narrative. As a cast of 25, I think they wanted parts for various different people. But that's an example of a little narrative that's 4 verses long, turned into a 2-hour show with cannons, costumes, sunsets, everything.
That's amazing.
That's never been performed either, but it's another different story.
Oh, no.
It's available for somebody to do if they do want to do it.
Wow. No, that'd be, and what would that feel like when that actually, if that was to be performed?
It was great fun to do, actually. And I think probably, well, as far as I can make out, they had somebody in mind who was going to direct it. I didn't feel I could direct it. I'm a television director, not a theatre director. And there comes a point when you've written something, you need to hand it over to the director and the actors to play around with it and to, so even though I'd done it as far as I could go, there's some business and stuff, as they call it in the trade, the actors, how they're moving around each other and all that kind of stuff. Right. It's pointless for the writer to do that. It needs to happen in workshopping, kind of in the early rehearsals.
Sure. Yeah.
And this guy, I think, he then left the island, and I don't think they could find anybody else who had the necessary experience to take on such a big project.
Okay.
So they paid, I'm pleased to say, and after a couple of years, the copyright reverted to me, and I still haven't decided what to do with it. I'd love to make it into a movie, but someday I might.
Stay tuned. Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that one thing that you touched on, which you kind of brought up, going through those songs actually earlier on, was trying to condense a story, a narrative into a song. Now, I would, one of my bucket list items one day is to be able to write a folk song. I'm very much inspired by that kind of music about history, and I've tried, and that is my sticking point. Even as an author, I've tried to write short stories, can't do it. I just can't seem to condense. I'm too fluffy. So that little bit of advice, that probably stick with me actually.
Well, I think probably it helped that I'm a documentary maker, so I'm used to editing. I mean, I'm an editor. I'm used to. So I'm still making films for not much money, but I'm making them again for an organisation called Woodland TV, who just bung me a bit of money, and I quite enjoy doing that sort of thing. But I have a various ways I make films, but I make them on the hip. So I will pick a topic, or be given a topic, and then go out and I will interview people, which is this sort of old-fashioned way of doing it. In the old days, because filming was so expensive, you went and interviewed people first, and you did it on tape because you couldn't afford a camera. And then you edited what they said, and you went back with a camera and you tried to get the same responses from them, but only the bits you needed, not all the rambly stuff you didn't use. And then, in fact, there was a technique where you could even go and make a documentary, certainly a short one, where you used the original tape, the original audio recording. And because you got close-ups of the person who was talking at the appropriate moments, the audience never realized that you'd never got a shot of them actually talking. There was no lip sync. And that's a technique I've used. I still use that today. So I'm very used to taking large amounts of other people's words and using them to create a story. So I'm script writing with other people's voices, and I do a lot of that. I've done so much of it that it comes second nature to me. I mean, I've made thousands of films over my lifetime, and I think that when you're sitting down to start creating something, what I don't know, I have written a book, a novel, right at the beginning of my writing career, just after I left college. And it was rubbish. And I had another go at it a few years later. It wasn't any better. And I'm in awe of people who write books. I've just been rereading Kate Atkinson's A God in Ruins, which is an astonishing book. It's a second of a pair. The other one's called Life After Life, about brother and sister. And she's just an extraordinary novelist. And it's not told it's not picaresque, it's not told in a narrative in linear order. It jumps around in time, and it has multiple narrators, and it somehow manages still to hold together this extraordinary weave of stories. And she even plays around with time and alternative sort of realities and the
Okay.
alternative lives. Well, I would recommend those two. I haven't read Time After Time, Life After Life yet.
Right.
But I'm going to wait. I need to, because I've read the other one twice. I've just finished reading it. It's such a powerful book. I need to let it go away.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to it some other time. But yes, I'm in awe of people who can do that. But going back to the songwriting, have you come across my little booklet on narrative songwriting?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, well, I can help you because I wrote one.
Cool.
Yeah, I did these. I used to do workshops on songwriting at festivals. Tom was always in demand as a workshop leader. Absolutely brilliant. How to play the banjo, how to play the mandolin,
Right.
all manner of other things. Actually, a whole range of stuff that he's brilliant teacher. Everybody absolutely loves it, and he doesn't matter how good or bad they are. I mean, some really good people will go along to his workshops and come away having learned something. But what could I do? So I thought, well, I can do something on songwriting. We did workshops together as well. Okay. But I specialized in workshops on how to play around with traditional stories, so how to adapt traditional songs.
Okay.
Which is quite interesting. Once did one with two people, Mary Humphreys and Anna Harter, who were great traditional musicians and friends of mine, and they had made a song out of traditional sources, but would still be called a traditional song. Oh. And I had been dissatisfied with that from a storytelling perspective because I'm a storyteller. Yeah. So I had made a new song. It's called Rue. And mine, I would call it traditional arranged, but I've definitely played with it. I've gone to a deeper level than they would ever consider doing. They don't need to do that. They're presenting fragments of the song in a coherent way, which is what traditional musicians do. It's all gets muddled up and reworked. You know, there's no perfect version of it. There's just older versions, or what might be older versions, where something that's been written is had that discipline applied to it. And we used to do workshops together talking about how our different approaches are interesting. Anyway, so a magazine called Living Tradition asked me if I could write all that up into a sort of series of articles, which was then serialized in the Living Tradition magazine over a number of weeks. And I think it's still downloadable from there, but there's a link from my website, tombliss.co.uk. Okay. Some videos there, including some of the more recent stuff I've been doing, which is not really folk, although it's played on folky instruments. We'll talk about that another time. But if you read that, there's a lot about narrative songs and about tradition and about the approach to melodies. And obviously it's better if you come to the workshops, but people have read them and said it. And there's some other links to some other similar work that I admire by other people as well in that document.
I will hunt that out. I've always had these ideas floating around my head, and I think certain stories have always appealed to me from a certain time, and it's coming through. Shipwreck stories, for example, don't know, always strike a chord with me. I've used the sinking of the Clarendon on the coast of the Isle of Wight. I've used that in one of my short stories before. Particularly drawn to, obviously, like I've said, Flotsam and Jetsam of yours. Visited the Mary Rose Museum again after 20 years or so since I last saw the wreck as a kid. I went there this weekend, and it's just kind of, I don't know, I'm in awe of things like that because there's such a story to it, and it's such a tragic end to these things, and
Well, it's a very shocking thing, a shipwreck, isn't it? It's one is, you're kind of drawn to the horror of it. This big, safe thing. They look so alien when you see them on the rocks, and I have seen ships wrecked. But so there's another example there of another workshop. Actually, came out of a workshop, Sidmouth one year, Sidmouth Festival. I was asked to do a series of narrative workshops in the middle of the night. It was very odd. Had to be there at 7:30 in the morning, which of course most musicians are still fast asleep. And we were given the topic of the wreck of the Napoli, which is on Branskin Beach, just next door. See it very clearly from Sidmouth. And on the first day, I'm doing one of the song introductions now. It'd probably come out verbatim even after 10 years. And we were given a load of material by ladies from Branscombe, from the Oral History Society, and they came with a load of typescript interviews, which had been done on the night with the looters, as for want of a better term.
Yeah.
And we did, I think it was an hour every morning for 5 mornings. And at the end of it, this lad called Richard Toller presented, everybody got up and sang their song at the end. I didn't actually write one myself. I just sort of sat back and watched them doing it. And Richard wrote a song Light. I mean, it's a lovely melody. It's his melody. But there are a few little things that I couldn't resist tweaking. And I hummed and hawed for a long time. I thought, no, I should just present it. It's his work, Yeah. But he was a nice guy. And I said, do you mind if I give it a little bit of a tweak here and there? Because I wanted to put it on the album. And I needed to be up to a certain intensity of songwriting, of storytelling.
Yeah.
And the basic idea was definitely his. So it's on The Whisper, this one.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
It's called Branskin Bay. And it's done unaccompanied. So there's no, oh, no, tell a lie. No, it's the Mighty Montague. There's at least 2 or even 3 shipwreck songs on all my albums. The Mighty Montague is about the wreck of the Montague on Lundy Island. That's a funny one.
I like that one. Yeah.
I could almost do that for you now. That's about a relation of a relation. That's another long story. So Branskin Bay was he had this idea of somebody tossing a coin, and because it turns out that some of the lads had found a motorbike, and there was a dispute about who'd got the motorbike, because somebody had found it first and taken the keys out of the tank. Right. And they'd gone away to get some help to bring this motorbike up the beach. And when they got back, there was some other people with it. And they said, I've got the key. And so they tossed a coin for it. And that's true. And he won and read about, and Richard had used this as a narrative of the penny spinning, and of having gone to a race. So it's almost like, I think he was I suspect he was a Show of Hands fan. There's a little bit of a homage, shall we say, to the Galway Farmer. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Or at least it makes me think of that. So there was an example of a true story, a shipwreck story, being made into this wonderful little bit. And there's times when, I can't remember if it was his idea or mine now, I'll give him the credit, where the motorbike is a horse and the horse is a motorbike. These 2 steeds, these stallions, become almost interchangeable, because the horse that he put the money on and lost originally was called Branskin Bay. And it turned out that the old woman who'd given him the tip wasn't talking about the horse. She was saying, go down to the seaside, there's a motorbike there. I only realised that at the end of the song. You should have a listen to that.
I love that.
It's probably the best album for narrative songwriting.
Okay, I'll go back and I will re-listen to that. It's, there's a couple more songs, just briefly, I want to touch on of yours, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm saying this, have more of a personal sort of story behind them. First of all, the Violin. I absolutely love that song. I think you played it at the first gig that I saw of yours, and
that's the one that started the whole thing going, really. So I had already written the Silver Load then, but I was thinking, what else can I do? And I'd read a book called Accordion Crimes by E. Annie Prow, who I think it's probably from Guernsey, because that's a Guernsey name. But she wrote a very famous book called The Shipping News, which was made into a great movie with Judi Dench and various people. But this is which is a lovely book, actually, very funny, but also very touching. But Accordion Crimes is very dark, and it's about an accordion which is taken over to the United States, to the Western Hemisphere, by immigrants. And I think it starts off as a Norwegian, with a Norwegian family, but it's passed around different families, and it moves through different traditions. It's played different types of music played on it, and everybody that plays this instrument comes to a sticky end, it seems. And it's quite hard work. And I didn't really, in fact, I didn't even finish reading it, but I thought, who used to own my violin? Where's it come from? Could I create something? So the only bits of information I knew for sure was that when I had it valued, it was made somewhere like Salzburg, somewhere in Austria, in sort of 1930s. That was what I had. And then it has Paris in tiny letters on the bridge, which is actually a make of a bridge, but obviously French. So I thought, well, it's been in Strasbourg, it's been in Paris, and it's been in London, where my dad bought it. I think my mum got it actually, but Dad fitted better with the story. And so that's 3 places. Where else could it have been? Well, I can probably make 4 verses up out of that. And happily struck on a nice tuning. I mean, the melody of that song is based on guitar tuning. Has an unusual tuning, which happened to fall to the hand and created this nice effect. And the melody came from it. And unfortunately, because very few people understand that tuning, it's been covered a lot. It's probably the only one of my songs that's entered the tradition in the technical sense. In that it's been played by so many people that it's started to take on a life of its own. It's no longer my song. But quite a lot of the versions are played in standard tuning, and you can't do the crucial bass walk in standard tuning. You haven't got enough fingers to do it. And so people have changed the melody to get round that. And I think the song's the weaker for it, because that's what I like. I've got the lyrics. I love that guitar bit. I was just so lucky that I happened to accidentally find it. But yes, it's an immensely powerful song, and it was a very difficult one to place. And in the end, I decided, certainly when I started doing solo gigs, I thought I'd do it first, because it doesn't need much introduction. And it just, people who hadn't come across me before, just knock them back in their seats, and then I could work on them for the rest of the evening. Whereas if I saved it up to the end of the evening, people might already walked out long before they heard it. So it became, and in fact, I played it so often that it's the one song I dropped. And in fact, talking about my new band, I say it's a new band, been going for a long time, but we hardly ever meet for various reasons, but it's actually 4 different bands in one. So 4 singer-songwriters who normally could never coexist in a band. I had the bright idea of having each when one of us is singing, when I'm singing my song, it's my band and they're my backing band. And when Paddy's singing, blah blah blah. And we picked our best material, best 5 songs that we thought would fit, and we worked it up, and it works very well like that. All good singers, all great players. But Paddy, who I've known for years, is a fantastic really rock songwriter, a very successful career in that guise. Was signed up by Sire at the same time as the Rosillos and the Undertones, but quite as cheap. But Paddy had, even though we'd been playing together in a band and he'd known me all these years, he'd never heard the violin, because I just stopped doing it. It never occurred to me. And it was only the last time we met, which was a few months ago, we all happened to be in England at the same time. And I said, maybe we should do this one, because I haven't played it for a long time. And he said, bloody hell, I've never heard that before. So that shows, even the song like that, I wouldn't say I got bored with it. I just think it had run its course. It belonged to other people.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, no, I really do love that, and I just love I think it's in the last verse where you bring it up to date, and then you really hammer the message home that it was yours. It's
exactly, yeah.
And a bit more of a comical one was Silk and Leather.
Oh yeah. Well,
I do like that one. It's a fun one.
Yeah. I like doing the comedy ones. It's tricky to do comedy in song, and I've got a few. So the Mighty Montague, that's a funny one. I dare say Adair is a decent sort of chap, but he struggled to check his reckoning and never troubled to study the map. It's a right tongue twister to do. But yeah, so it's Silk and Leather. So again, I was scratching around. I found that audiences would buy into a song more if I could exhibit some personal connection. Which isn't always possible, but usually there was something. And so Silk and Leather is the strapline for Bliss tweed. So my family, my great-great-grandfather and beyond, were cloth manufacturers in the West Country, in Shipping Norton. And I'd always thought they were capitalists and didn't really want a lot to do with them living in Leeds. You keep quiet about things like that. But then I found out he was a utopian socialist, like Robert Owen and Titus Salt and all those, and he looked after his workers. So I thought, having spent many years writing, corporate scripts and working in advertising and things like that, I would write a sort of jingle for dear old William Bliss, my great-great-grandfather, and his tweed. And so Silk and Leather is the result, and it picks up on quite a humorous little story.
It does,
little incident which I've stuck in there. There's a nice photograph actually on the internet where, judging by the fact that my mouth is shut like that, and I'm playing the squeeze box, and Tom is making a kind of face. doing sort of what's his name? Les Dawson bass.
Yeah.
And it was one of our publicity shots, and it's still around on the internet. And I realised recently that I'm singing the word bum at that point. My mouth is like, and Tom's doing that face, and it's captured it.
Brilliant.
And we used to do it in churches, and we never quite knew whether we should apologise behind us. Singing bum in church.
Is that still part of the sort of family dynasty now, or is that?
No, not really. No. My sister Anne still has some. When the mill eventually it passed from the family hands, because, as the song relates, dear old William was so generous that he gave lots of money away. And after the mill burned down and the new one, the famous one that's there now, was built, he overspent and didn't then make enough money back. So in fact, Bliss Tweed is interesting. I'm pretty sure, I can't prove this, but I'd like to try, that the Stars and Stripes were made out of horse blankets. Okay, the very first Stars and Stripes was cobbled together in a hurry from 3 horse blankets.
Right.
And Bliss Tweed, the real money that the Bliss factory came from horse blankets, blue horse blankets, and blue serge uniforms. So the Union Army was clad in Bliss tweed. So it's possible that the blue in the Stars and Stripes was. Anyway,
wow.
After the mill was rebuilt, it didn't make enough money. So he left too much. In order to honour the legacies, they had to sell the mill. So it passed to a family called Fox, who recently, again, sold it again. So there's actually another funny little coincidence there. My middle name is Cordew, and it's now owned by a person called Cordew.
Wow.
How weird is that?
Yeah.
The middle name, the family name, goes back to Chipping Norton, the Bliss family and the Cordew family. 2 members of the Bliss family married 2 members of the Cordew family. So we're really Cordew Bliss. That's the family name for the males only. Anyway, so that's it really. That there is cloth around. I've got various bits, but it's now luxury flats, and I think it's where David Cameron and people like that live.
Let's say that the better. So let's bring a little bit up to date then. Talk about what you've been up to sort of since the 10 years that you say you were making this music with Tom Napper and that. So bring what's going on at the moment. You say you've got a band that you
it's only very occasional. I mean, after I stopped playing with Tom, we had after my masters, we had another little go. We did a few more gigs the following year, but we realized it wasn't really viable, because he was coming down, staying with me, we were rehearsing, then going on down, doing the gigs, then he was coming back to mine, and then going back up to Scotland. Sure. And it just wasn't really going to happen. I looked around for various other people to play with, did a few bits and pieces with other people, but nothing really felt in, Tom had spoiled it for everybody. We just worked so well, the way our voices blended. We spent 10 years like husband and husband really in the van together, and we almost never had any disagreement about anything. It was a great relationship, and I do miss him actually from that point of view, as well as the actual music. But I think we both had enough of the schlepping round. It was the traffic really. I was getting fed up, and my carbon tire print and everything. So and really I had to go cold turkey. So I knew that if I went on accepting gigs as a solo artist, which I could easily have done, then I'd never do anything else. I'd just go on doing little bits. It was either going at the full tilt, which I didn't want to do, or it would stop altogether. So I stopped altogether and really threw myself into the climate work and the environmental work, which had always been there. But now I had the qualifications and the job, if you like, to do it. So I started doing all kinds of work in Leeds, decided to concentrate on city scale research, particularly around urban food. Okay. So I started a number of organizations which I have been involved with until recently. So that's been the focus. It still involves storytelling, and it still involves landscapes, but just on a different scale. So, and I've become, because of the whole problem, the pushback from the science. So I've become really interested in science narratives now. Okay. So the whole idea of the scientific method is to stop the overarching desire of human beings to have a story arc. Now, I could talk about this for a long time. We haven't got time to go into it, but the human paradigm, you know, the world view, is really important to the development of the human intelligence. And if you go back to the very early stages of human consciousness, as people start to ask questions, they start to get answers that they can't resolve, and you get cognitive dissonance. You know, when things go wrong, don't turn out as you're expecting, the harvest fails, or the berries aren't there, or a child dies, or something terrible happens. And so you have this thing about the narrative being stronger in the human brain than the search for truth. And it wasn't until the Age of Enlightenment that the scientific method caught up. And the whole point of the scientific method is to push back against that narrative. We still need it, but this is why people now will become anti-vaxxers or anti-mask or anti-climate or whatever, because they find a narrative that's stronger, that's easier to believe than the awkward, unfinished, changing, often conflicting truths such as we know them, or, you know, emerging truths, and science is only emerging truth. So I've become really fascinated by that, because it started being a problem with the climate thing, and then the pandemic came along and I saw exactly the same behaviors, exactly the same problems, all teased out in the same way. So if I was to write a book now, it would be a textbook on hyperapophenia, which is this human tendency to see patterns in random places. So constellations, Jesus in a piece of burnt toast, or a piece of cheese, you know, all that. That's called apophenia. It's a natural thing. It's what we do. It's how we recognize our way back to the cave, the landmarks and so on, seeing patterns, and the whole creation of narrative comes back to apophenia. But in certain cases, it goes beyond into a process called hyperapophenia, when people start seeing, making random connections and believing them to be more truthful, more connected than they actually are. And that then becomes a problem. That's where you get the whole confusion and denial. So that's where I'm at. So storytelling is absolutely at the root of everything I'm thinking about at the moment. And just to bring Bang up to date, I left my job with the climate team at the University of Leeds because I'd done what I'd set out to do, and I wanted them to spend my salary on another scientist, a specialist in exactly what we needed, which they have now done. And I was going to do something else at the university, but the pandemic happened. And so I wound up being a full-time carer for our granddaughter, because my son and daughter-in-law weren't able to do that. We couldn't send her anywhere else, because my daughter's vulnerable for various reasons. So they moved into my house, and I wound up looking after this marvelous little girl, and that took up most of last year. Now she's starting school, and I need to think of something else to do. So when I get back from Alderney to Leeds, I will make some decisions about I've got a few things I've got to tidy up. I've still got the teaching work, but I need to do something, and I'm not quite sure what yet. Music probably won't be a big part of it. But it is the idea of, just to go back to the band, so after not playing at all, really, I mean, not even picking up an instrument for year after year, then I was asked, because this guy Paddy I mentioned before, Paddy Hogan, he knew that I was secretly a closet percussionist, that I really liked playing percussion, and he was launching a solo CD he'd done, which is quite folky, lots of lovely songs, really prompted by the death of his lovely brother Brian, who was another great friend of mine, and their sort of holidays in Ireland. So it's very informed by the Irish tradition without actually being folk music. And so he asked me if I played percussion, and two other guys that he also asked to play in that gig. One I'd been in bands with, Phil Cochrane, fantastic guy, a really talented musician and songwriter, brilliant songwriter, and again, multi-instrumentalist. And so it was great to play with him. And somebody I'd not met before, called Den Miller, who's again a multi-instrumentalist and a bit younger than us, but rising star of the folk scene. And the personalities just clicked for that one-off gig. And we said, well, we've got to keep this going, but how we're going to fight over material, because we've all got the whole, we've all got 20 years worth of songs. And then I came up with that idea of it being 4 bands in one. The problem is that I'm over here a lot, and Den's wife works in Nairobi, so he spends a lot of time over there with his younger kids, and a lot of time in England with his older kids.
So,
So, the chances of the last lights we're standing are still pretty difficult. So we're not doing a lot, but it's just nice that it's nice being in a band,
yeah,
because us musicians, we don't have real friends. We've just got people we're in a band with, and then you're mates with them until the band breaks up. Then you form a new band, and you think mates, they're your friends. Then we haven't got real friends.
Secret to it. That's the secret to it. So, just before we sort of wrap it up, if anyone wants to keep up with any of your work, your music or anything else, where can they find you? Is your music still available, or what's your online presence?
The music is available. Yeah, you'll find it all. I stopped chasing the internet scalpers, so that you can download my stuff from various places. I've made the money. I've still got some unsold CDs, but we sell them here in the house. We have guests in here. It's like a little Airbnb type thing that we're not here. So there's a little shop over there. Can't see it actually.
Awesome.
But they do sell them in the shops here, but I think everybody's sold out, and I've stopped bothering to distribute them. You can get them. Well, I think you can get them online, but I haven't posted any out for years, so I don't suppose that's working anymore. I've got a few boxes back in Leeds, but you can download them. So that's tombliss.co.uk for everything musical. Everything else you can find me at urbal.tv, URBAL. That's the opposite of Rurban. If any planners in the audience,
okay.
It's about the relationship of cities to their hinterland. I won't go into more than that, but urbal.tv's got links to all of the other work that I do. It's actually much less than it was a couple of years ago, because I'm currently withdrawing from that. Having set up a lot of organizations and rather overworked myself keeping them all going. Now we've got great teams in place, and I'm just stepping back a bit and letting things go on under either the same name or new names and things like that. I'm not quite sure exactly how much involvement I'm going to have in all that, but it's a lot to do with urban food and trees and parks and gardens and things like that. And then there's the university work and all those various other things. Wonderful. So those two are the websites to remember: tombliss.co.uk and urbal.tv.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much for your time. It's been amazing to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too.
Yeah, thanks for the memories. Thanks for the music. As from me, it's still those favourites I still go back to. Still draw inspiration.
Well, it's a funny thing, I don't, as I said, I don't play, but I have a couple of cousins. One particular cousin who's more like a brother to me, and he comes over here and overlaps with me for a week. He's got two small boys. He's my age, but he married late, and they absolutely love my songs, and so I'm persuaded to get out the old Echo Ranger that lives over here and play them, and so in fact a couple of weeks ago I was in this very room doing a micro gig for two very excited small boys, and I did the violin, and I did someone upstairs, and what else? Boat to Brew, of course. Brew being this map here, this is Alderney. And there's an island there, that's Baru. Boat to Baru is probably, after the violin, is my most successful song.
Okay.
And that's on, it's on Island Stories, but it's on the Slide album. But it's not, Tom and I didn't play that. Okay. The band did. That's almost like a little love song, that one. I don't do many what I'd call relationship songs. But I nicked the tune. Off the band Iona, who are friends.
Okay. Songs are friends. So you still get to connect to it, which is brilliant. And
absolutely, yeah.
No, that's lovely. But no, thank you for your time.
Nice to talk to you.
And you, mate, and all the best with everything you got going on. And
thanks very much indeed.
No worries.
And to you.
Cheers, mate.
Bye now.
Bye.
I will sing you a song of William B. Did very well for mine and me. Had us all work in his factory, making silk and leather. No gardener could be wholly good, but he seemed to do the best he could. Fed us faith and facts and food, making silk and leather. So here's to Mr. William.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and hit the subscribe button. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep updated about all future shows.